We are live. We are live. Hey, Monica.
Hi, Sala. Nice to see you.
Good to see you too. Welcome to the inaugural episode of the Behaviour Sleuths. I'm Sala Hombing.
I'm Monica Borschel.
And we work together helping families and individuals. I work as a family mediator. Monica works as a trauma specialist and a counselor and psychologist. And we realized that we had lots of conversations. But Monica, do you want to explain why we're doing the Behaviour Sleuths?
Yeah, so as I was working with people individually, I felt like there could be more done, because if we look at the news, which is quite horrific these days, there's a lot of people in crisis. And so how do they get access to information, mental health? How could we help more people on a bigger scale? And then change was interesting because I've been through quite a number of changes this year, as I'm sure a lot of people had, and it was starting to affect my health. And so we wanted to know, how is change related to stress or related to mental health and physical health?
Yeah. So Monica kind of said, do you think we could do something? And then we realized that we have these conversations all the time. We both go away and do lots of reading and research, and we thought this might be interesting. So we are launching the Behaviour Sleuths as a place where we can talk about human behavior, psychology, stresses that we all experience, tools to deal with them, and to make things better. And that we are planning on doing a little mini series for different topics. So as Monica's saying, the first topic we've chosen is change. And I guess we're looking at all sorts of different types of changes, Monica, because you were just saying, you experienced a lot of personal change, but we're looking at all types of change, right?
Yes. So change at work, change in marriage, change during the pandemic, change or loss. Loss is a big one, right? So psychologists, they measure on the life change index scale how much stress someone is in. So in 1967, two psychiatrists started noticing, why is everyone getting sick? It must be related to stress. And so they made this scale. And in the top 10, the scale is definitely not everyday events. In the top 10 is related to loss, but even marriage and retirement, because this changes how we are in the world, right? Whether it's our identity or a loss or even a gain. But things change quickly. And so how do we adapt to that change? And why does it affect our health the way it does?
Yeah. And I guess at the moment, it seems like lots of people are experiencing change. Like societally, structures seem to be changing, things are in flux. But I know for you, this has been a big year, because we used to be able to do this in person, and now we're doing it through the interweb. So do you want to maybe talk about some of the changes you've experienced in the last year or so?
I've had some big life changes. Yeah. So Sal and I met in Hong Kong through family law, basically, right? Working together, helping families through divorce, even doing your Map the Maze podcast, which is why I asked you to do this, because I thought your Map the Maze is pretty amazing. But for me, I was a psychologist in Hong Kong, doing pretty well, I thought, and then political things started to happen in Hong Kong, right? There was the protests and then national security law, which seemed to bring everyone's trauma to the surface. So it's the busiest I've ever been as a psychologist, but I also had to watch my stress levels, because as an American, some of these things felt very unsafe, which is why I came back to the US after living in Hong Kong for 10 years, and I had massive culture shock. I felt like the US had changed. Like, what's up with all this gun violence? How is that even a thing? How is that even an option when you're upset or angry?
Yeah.
And then when I came, my psychology license doesn't just transfer over. I was told I need to gain a whole new master's degree. My PhD, my master's didn't go into a new master's degree. And because I have a PhD in social work, then I couldn't go backward and get a master's in social work. So I felt like my identity was missing. Everything I thought I was good at was a big loss. I missed you. I missed Hong Kong. I missed my clients. I missed my friends. I missed my job. And then I'm back in the US, which is great, but it's a pandemic. So how do I meet people? How do I make friends? How do I find work? So it felt overwhelming, and I started to get really sick. Like I lost a tooth, right? I got kidney stones. I felt like I had COVID at one point. I was run down. So, and that's kind of how they made this stress test. These big life changes, they pump cortisol, adrenaline in our body, depending on how we view the change. Is it a loss? Is it scary? Is it a gain? But then what do we do with the gain, right? And I think, Sal, you were saying you feel some things about not having a lot of change, and actually it's been okay, right?
Yeah, I think that's hard for me, is that I feel as if a lot of my friends, and I just reconnected with a school friend over the weekend, and just hearing about all of the losses she's had to deal with in the last 6 months was just really hard. Because for me, as an introvert, I'm fine staying home. I'm fine kind of not going out and having to stand in bars. That is my definition of hell. So I haven't had to experience negative change. I've never been so busy at work. So I actually kind of experienced positive kind of changes, in the sense that my work suddenly became incredibly busy. And honestly, life hasn't changed a lot. We haven't in Hong Kong had sort of severe lockdowns. So for me, things didn't change. And I think there's also an element, and I think we're just talking about how interesting this would be to look at. There's an element of survivor guilt, that actually I haven't had to experience significant and negative change because of the pandemic. So I think that's also another element. What happens if the people around us or the people we care about are going through this and we feel okay? Even I think sometimes the people I work with. So as Monica said, we were working in family law together. That's how we met. So every day I'm working with people who separate and divorce. They are experiencing micro changes. You know, who's going to pay the utility bills if it's not the other person? Who's going to pick up the kids after football? To macro, you know, I'm no longer a married person. I'm no longer part of a relationship. I'm no longer Mrs. What's-it or Mr. Who's-he What's-it. And those people have really struggled. That I think that layered on top of what's happening in the pandemic is, as you say, people, it's overwhelm. It's just overload in terms of change. It's too much. And a lot of it, I think, for most of the people I work with, feels imposed. They haven't chosen these changes. They haven't volunteered for them. They've been imposed. And so the other thing that we wanted to talk about was how does that impact how we respond if a change is imposed or if it's chosen? So in that work sense, yes, I'm really seeing a lot of change for people and people struggling. But then in my own workplace, I used to be in banking. And definitely when I was in banking, you know, you kind of sign up to an ethos and I was comfortable with it, but then it changed around me. So just in the workplace, there can be lots of changes, whether it's a new boss or new functional role or a promotion, or the whole ethos of your workplace changes around you. So how do you deal with that? How do you even start thinking about it? So that's been my COVID experience.
Yeah, it's interesting. You and I both got busier, right? I mean, of course, you can imagine the psychologist would be busier, but as a mediator, all of a sudden, everyone wanted to get divorced now.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. And I think it wasn't even, I know I've read sort of a lot of lawyers giving interviews saying, oh, we're so busy because people are trapped in their homes together. And now they can really see why they don't want to be in a relationship. I haven't really seen that. I've seen people who are on a path, and this is more what you were saying, which is it has to happen now, that there is a lot of uncertainty around us. This is something I can control, is I think how people feel. I haven't kind of had people verbalize that, but that's what I'm seeing, that it was sort of like, it's kind of now or never, let's get this done. So I think that's also really interesting, is how does sort of change happening around us influence how we make decisions about what needs to change in our lives? Because I think that's the other thing I keep seeing is people saying, I'm going to make a change in my life. This has made me reassess. where I am. So change is
Yeah.
also a tool in that sense, I guess.
Yeah, so there's a lot to talk about when we talk about change, right? So why are these big life changes creating stress?
Mm.
And what if it's, a loss of a loved one? I didn't sign up for that. I didn't sign up for this divorce versus I want this divorce,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So, yeah, how is the difference between what we don't want and what we want, and how do we cope with it? So, for
Yeah.
example, one of these that's really high is retirement on the stress scale. Some people maybe really want it and some people don't. It's a loss of identity again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think loss
So,
of identity and also unintended consequences
yes.
that particularly I see people who file for divorce, are pushing the divorce, want to get it done. And then as we start trying to put in place arrangements for the future, this isn't exactly what my expectations were about what was going to happen, or I didn't expect this consequence. And I think that's also interesting, is that even when we sort of deliberately seek change, it's not necessarily always what we think it's going to be. And that then becomes its own challenge.
That's true too. So yeah, sometimes we lead the change and sometimes it happens to us, like COVID. Some people could see it coming, tried to warn, and not everyone took it seriously. And so today in the US, the CDC said, okay, you can take off your mask if you've been vaccinated. And some people might say that, oh, that's a great change. And other people might say that's a scary change.
Yeah.
Right. So it's how we interpret is what is the fear behind this change, or what is this insecurity? Can I pull this off?
Yeah.
Can I pull off this marriage thing? Can I pull off this promotion? Can I pull off this mortgage? So sometimes there's doubt, but what if you lose someone suddenly to COVID? Right? That is a shock.
Yeah.
So when does change become stress, become trauma?
Yeah.
Right?
And when is change a positive as a spur to action, as a spur to grow and develop? Yeah.
Yeah. So have you seen that in mediation where people say, I don't want this divorce, but they change for the better in the long run, or okay.
Yes. And I actually feel that not, I think, because we're trying to make things difficult or negative for people. I think it's because we're trying to respond to the pain that we see in the clients that we're working with. But I think, focus too much on the loss that they're experiencing and the dislocation that they're experiencing, and not enough on the opportunities that actually can come through mediation, can come through divorce and separation, to, reclaim your identity, to rebuild your independence, to change the way you're co-parenting, to be responsible for your financial independence, to learn new skills to manage conflict. So I think it's we need to have a more balanced view. But I think those are kind of the things that we will be talking about in future episodes. So looking at that scale that you mentioned around loss and change, and how do we then assess how much stress and change are we under? And I guess, how does that impact us? And then also looking at some different tools, skills.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the stress test you're talking about, it is ranked, right? And so death of a spouse is impact score 100. And at the very bottom is minor violation of the law, which is 11. And I think that the point being is some of these are adding more cortisol in your body than others, right? So loss, divorce, jail. But marriage is up there too. Marriage is at a 47 or 50. So if you have a score of over 300, it's a good chance you're going to start getting sick.
Yeah.
So the stress affects our body, and by putting cortisol, adrenaline, and we can only handle so much, because once we hit that overwhelm, exhaustion phase, we burn out, we get sick, we have to take time off.
Yes. So next episode.
Yes. So next episode.
More about what does that mean? So how does cortisol impact us when we are experiencing stress? Why might that lead to health issues in future? So join us for episode 2, and we look forward to seeing you next week, I guess.
Yeah, join us next week. We'll talk about coping with change as well, right? Psychological flexibility. Like you
Yeah.
said, finding the opportunity.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks a lot, guys. Bye.
See you next week.